Well, good morning, everyone. Sylvie here calling in from the beautiful Hawke's Bay. The objectives from today are to define and clearly understand what a performance review is and what a performance review is not. We want to understand what people outcomes a robust performance review process will deliver. We also want to understand the MyHR performance review module, because this is the tool that's available for you to use. And something that's a bit more specific is I'd like to understand better the difference between lead and lag indicators as objectives, and we'll be workshopping setting some KPIs or some objectives for two different positions. So we'll be starting from a reasonably high level first, talking about what a performance review is, and then we'll zoom in to understand what they can deliver, and then we'll actually practice setting some objectives, because we get feedback that that's difficult if it's not something you're used to doing all the time. So what is a performance review? We get asked this a lot because language among businesses and among communities can be quite different. So to be clear, a performance review is a tool, much like a hammer or a screwdriver or a skill saw is a tool, and it has particular outcomes that it will deliver. So performance reviews are good for ensuring everyone is on the same page about what good performance in a role looks like. They help provide accountability for your people and for yourself about deliverables and outcomes. They are intended to facilitate valuable and real human, so person-to-person discussions about development, career paths, and improving performance at work. And finally, they can be a tool for driving cultural changes across your business by making the required high-level or strategic cultural change quite explicit in terms of actions and behaviours that you're wanting your individual employees to display. So in a nutshell, that's what a performance review is. Again, I'm sure I've missed a couple of details, but at a general level, this is what they can deliver for you. On the flip side, what is a performance review not? So it is not performance management. You're not using it to manage your terrible performance. It is not an engagement survey. It's not a chance for you to have a chat about how they're feeling about life and what their favourite things are about their colleagues. It's not a reiteration of your company values and or code of conduct, and it's not for setting either unrealistically high or easily achievable low objectives from your team. So we see performance reviews across our clients used in a range of ways. The ones where the managers and the employees both get the least value out of the whole process are when they are used in one of these ways, either to try and have a general discussion without any clear accountability, where you're just reiterating what the company expects of them generally and not in regards to their particular performance, or where the objectives that are set are unrealistically high, easily achievable, and just not really aligned with what it is you're wanting that person to deliver. Moving along, a good performance review will have 3 to 6 objectives in total, so we keep them quite short. They will have a combination of lead and lag indicators, and we'll talk more about that shortly, so don't worry about that too much. There will be clear expectations about what good performance looks like, and this is often using that SMART mnemonic, with performance review goals being, we'll talk more about that later when we're setting them. There will always be a thoughtful set of development activities to support achievement of those objectives in a good performance review. And the performance review itself will be over a sensible and most of the time flexible time frame, so that you can ensure your expectations stay relevant, because business and requirements of people's performance are changing all the time. You want to be able to make sure that you're flexible if need be. So coming back to lead and lag indicators, and we're now getting into the meat of what it is to set objectives in the performance review. In short, a lead indicator is behaviour that drives the outcome that you want. So an example of this might be making 15 cold calls a day, or spending an hour each week engaging with the business strategy and then identifying ways to implement that strategy in the business. So these types of objectives are helpful for helping your employee understand what behaviours you want them to display, because this isn't the business outcomes you're wanting, it's the behaviour you're wanting to see that you know or that you expect will contribute to that business outcome, which is why they're called lead. You're leading the employee to behave in the way that you want to deliver those outcomes. So a lag indicator is the outcome that you want to achieve. This might be grow our sales in the Waikato territory by 12% this financial year, or it might be reduce staff churn from 25% to 18%. These types of objectives are really useful for clearly outlining the outcomes you want for that employee to have achieved at the end of the performance review process. So you're not telling them how to grow sales in the Waikato territory. You're not telling them how to reduce staff churn. You're just saying, this is the measure for success and I want you to achieve that. How you achieve that is up to you. Lead indicators, so going back to the behaviour that drives the outcome, lead indicators tend to be useful where you have an employee who perhaps needs a bit of guidance or support in terms of behaviour that you want them to drive, that you want them to display, and a lag indicator, which is where the outcome is what you want to achieve, tends to be more useful where it's pretty clear what success looks like in this role. So you're giving them the metrics to support that, and you're letting them have the autonomy to deliver those results the way that you want. Lag indicators tend to show up a bit more in more senior level roles, and certainly in sales roles where success is often pretty straightforward. I'll just check in quickly and make sure that we're all doing okay. Oh, no messages from anyone? I'll keep going. So what does the MyHR performance review module do? We've talked about what a good review looks like. We've talked about some different types of objectives you might set. So our module that we've built in-house and is available to all of our MyHR members online allows you to manage your performance review process entirely online. You don't ever need to print anything or have any written documents in front of you. We've got a library of KPIs or objectives or whatever language you want to use, skills and development activities to help support you and your managers when you're crafting and preparing these performance reviews for your team. The website will then send you the manager check-in reminders to touch base with your people. So we try and take a bit of the administration away from remembering to go and have a chat to your people about their performance reviews. The module is accessible by both you and your employee or your team member if they have MyHR self-service enabled, so you can both participate online. And the most powerful piece of the performance review module, I think, is it allows for those assessments to be done online. So you have a really, really clear framework. It's just about going through the infrastructure that we've provided and choosing the assessment ratings and outcomes for your employee based on their performance over the last 3 months or the 6 months. So it's all online. It's available for free. It's not an extra charge. And it can be a really, really powerful tool when delivered right to make sure that your people are clear on what you're expecting from them and how you will be supporting them to achieve those objectives. Okay, so let's get stuck in. We're flying through the content, which is good. We might even be able to finish up early or take some extra questions. So the next steps in this webinar are to review the performance review process and communication chain between you, the manager, the MyHR software, and your employee. We'll then be setting some objectives for 2 employees, Charming Charles, who is an experienced sales rep, and Productive Penny, who's a new operations manager in a medium-sized business. Finally, we'll be taking a look at what the manager assessment for employees looks like, so that you get a feel for what the end of the process will involve and where the employee and the employer engage to agree on a final rating for the performance review. Cool. So one of the difficulties we come up against is when the managers or businesses are implementing the performance review process, it can be a little bit there can be some resistance to setting them up because it's unclear what communications will be sent to who and at what time. So what I want to do here is talk you through the process just so it's clear that not everyone sees everything at the same time is the key takeaway. There are times when the managers will perform actions and employees will perform actions, but not everything is visible to your employees the whole way through. So at the point where a performance review is in draft, so we're looking at PR action here in the middle, this column here, the manager or the owner of the business can edit, add, remove objectives, play around with the structure, just kind of have a tutu with things. And the employee can't see anything that's in draft. It's entirely blind to them. So it gives you the full access and full ability to make changes and make sure you've got it just the way that you want it to be before the employee will see it. So that's step 1. Step 2, you or your manager is now happy with the review and activates it, which now means the performance review has gone live. The employee at this stage receives their first communication about the performance review process. So they receive an email saying, hey, your objectives have been set up. They can then log in and see their targets and their objectives online. They can't make changes, they can't make comments, but it is visible to them so that they know what's expected of them and they can log back in and check those objectives at any time during the review process or during the year. So that's the employee's first touch point with the software. While the performance review is live, so you've set it up, maybe it's the 1st of January, you set it to run till the 30th of June. So January, February, March, April, and so on, the performance review is live and ticking away in the background. If you as the manager have asked for check-in reminder emails to be sent to you, you'll be receiving those on a monthly or a bi-monthly or a weekly schedule. And it's a prompt for you to make sure that the objectives you set in January, now in April, so 4 months later, are still reasonable and still realistic. And it's also a chance for you to go and have a chat to your employee to make sure that they're, 1, clear on what's expected of them, and 2, that they are comfortable that the support that you're giving them is appropriate for the objectives that you've set. The only time the employee will receive an email during this time is if their performance review is edited or changed in any way. So if you have had a chat with them and you've gone to look at their targets, if it's Charming Charles, our sales rep, and he's saying, well, I think 10% growth is far too low. We're having a really, really good quarter. I think that probably 12 or 13% growth is more realistic. You as the manager might then go into his review and make a change. So his target is no longer 10% growth, but 13% growth or 15% growth. Once that change has been made, Charles then gets an email to let him know that a change has been made to his performance review, and he can check in to see what that change is and to make sure that he's still clear on what's expected of him. Oh, excuse me. Moving on to step 4. At the end of the time period for the performance review, and again, we'll go through some screenshots later, so it'll be really, really clear what this looks like, but this is just the overall process. At the end of the 6 months, so you set a performance review in January, it's now June, you as the manager will get an email reminder letting you know that it's time to assess your employee's performance. So you will then log into MyHR and be presented with an assessment screen, which will give you a chance to rate their objectives 1 to 5, rate whether their skills were developing as expected, tick off that the development activities occurred and make sure that that was all running smoothly. And then you have some free text fields to complete and add any other feedback or any other information that might be relevant to this performance review. So at this point in time, it's not visible to the employee. I want to make that really clear because it's something we get asked all the time. When you as the manager are completing your assessment of the employee, it's completely blind to them. They don't get to see what you've said about their targets until you meet with them face to face at step 7. So it's completely blind. Once you have completed your assessment of them, the employee, step 5, then receives an email asking them to complete a self-assessment of how they performed. So they log into MyHR, they go through it and do the exact same things that you as the manager have just done. They get a chance to rate their objectives 1 to 5, make sure that the development activities happened, and provide their own feedback about what went well or what didn't go well or didn't go as expected during this performance review process. So they get an email and they do that in their own time. Step 6 is after the employee has completed that self-assessment, you as the manager will get an email reminder saying, hey, Charming Charles has completed his performance review. You can then log in and see both of your assessments. So if the target or the objective was achieve 15% sales growth because you had that really good first quarter, and Charles has said, yep, I think that I achieved that, that's a 3 out of 5, and you think that he also achieved it as a 3 out of 5, you'll see both of those next to each other. So most of the time, 70% of the time, let's say, 70% of the time employees and managers will, sorry for the interruptions, employees and managers will mark themselves pretty closely, but usually about 25 to 30% of the time there will be some reasonably major discrepancies, which might involve an employee saying, I think I really, really underperformed here, and the manager saying, I think you smashed it. What are you talking about? This is a fantastic quarter for you. So most of the time they're pretty aligned, but if there are any large gaps in where an employee rated themselves versus where you assess them, it's a good moment or a good flag for a discussion piece when you do finally meet to go through the final assessment. So we're in step 6. You can view both your own and the employee's assessments. You may want to take some notes here about where you do want to discuss with them in step 7, just to make sure that you're getting your prep sorted. And then step 7, you book a time with the employee, preferably in person, but over the phone is fine if you're not able to line up a face-to-face meeting, to go through the performance review and agree on a final assessment. So this is where if both of you have rated the employee a 3 or a 4, that's pretty easy. Their final rating is the 3 or the 4 that you both agreed on. But if there is a discrepancy between what you've assessed them at and where the employee has assessed themselves, this is your chance to have a chat and make sure that you're clear on where the differences come from and you mutually agree on what that final rating will be. And that's the last step in the performance review. So you've gone through and agreed on what the performance for the last 6 months or the last 3 months has been. You will then be prompted to set a new review, which takes you back up to step 1 for the next 3 months or the next 6 months or whatever the time period might be. But the key, this is getting into the detail again, the key takeaway here is just to make it really clear that there is a lot more happening on the left on the manager's side than there is on the employee side on the right. You can see that the employee only really gets prompts once the manager has done something. And when you as the manager have done something within the software, you will always be told that this will send a communication to the employee. So you're reminded along the way of what the employee is receiving and what the employee is seeing. Okay. So we've talked about what a good performance review looks like. We've looked at the communication flow and the process. Let's get stuck in and set some objectives because I really want to spend some time working through the thought process of setting up some good objectives because one, I think it's helpful and the feedback we've had is that it is helpful for our clients. But 2, it's not as complicated as people might think and I want to take some of the mystery away from it. So the 2 people we'll be setting some performance reviews for are Charming Charles, who's already made an appearance in our webinar today. So the scenario for Charles is that he is an experienced sales rep. So he's been with the business for a couple of years, he's delivering some good results, but he's looking for his next step up into a sales manager role. He wants to grow his career at this stage. So his head of sales is on board with that, wants to develop Charles and wants to help him grow in the business. So we'll go through his process first and then we'll work through Penny's. Productive Penny is a slightly different kettle of fish and she's got different challenges in her role. So she's the new operations manager for a medium-sized business. She's very experienced but has inherited a team that's historically underperformed a bit or just kind of been average in the results that they've been delivering. Her general manager wants her to get to know her team and put the work into turning around the performance over the next 6 months while also keeping an eye on business metrics. So rather than, unlike Charles, rather than being focused on career growth at this stage, she's focused on getting to know her new team because she's new to the business, while also keeping an eye on the business metrics that she's responsible for as operations manager as well. So I'll jump into one of our demo accounts within MyHR so that I can talk you through the process of setting those objectives without messing around with anyone in real life. Cool, and that's logged me back in. So when you're setting your own reviews in your own account, this is the process that you'll go through to set them. On the left-hand side, underneath Manage are your performance reviews. So if we're clicking on reviews, it will take you to the main screen to manage all of those pieces. Here are all your active your performance reviews, so those that are ticking away in the background because they've already been set. And on the left-hand side, you can jump at any time to the different reviews that are in the different stages of that 1 to 7 process we talked through before. But today, what we're interested in doing is adding a review for Charming Charles. Type in his name and that will come up. Cool, and he's the only person I want to set a review for at this stage. So I'll click next step. And I am setting goals for a future time period, so that's easy. Review period will start today and the review period will end in December. I make that say the 13th, that gives us some time before Christmas. And I want my check-in with Charles to be monthly, so I'll get a monthly email to let me know that I'm going to check in with him about his performance review. And I also want some reminders when the review period is nearing its end. So on the 13th of November, let's make that 2018. And make it a 14 for the Friday. So on the 14th of November, a month before his review is due to wrap up, I'll get a reminder to let me know this is coming up and then a reminder every week to let me know just to make sure I'm keeping on track of things. At any stage during this process, I can save the review to drafts if I want to take a break and go do something else and then come back to it, or if I get interrupted partway through. So remember, you do have the option of saving this and not losing your work. Next step. Okay. So this is where the meat of the performance review happens. I can either choose from a template, and I might have many templates set up. If I don't, I might just set one up from scratch, and we'll talk about templates a bit more later on. So Charming Charles, I'm going to add an objective here. And in our narrative, he is the Waikato salesperson. So I want him to grow sales in the Waikato by, let's go 10%. And that's a lag indicator. I'll just make a note there so we remember, because that's the outcome I want him to achieve. It's not about the behavior that I want him to demonstrate. I just want him to grow sales in the Waikato by 10%. And that's my main concern with this particular objective. Adding another one, I know that Charles is really comfortable on the phone, but he needs to do a little bit of work on his in-person sales technique. So I'm going to add a lead indicator to ask him to spend more time with his customers. With customers according to set meeting schedule. And I want him to have met 25% of his customers by end of September. And this is a lead objective. It's not an outcome that relates to the business, but it's a behavior that I want him to demonstrate to show that he's engaging with his people skills a bit more and developing that content there. What else do I want Charles to be achieving this year? I know that we have had a sales strategy put in place from 2018 to 2019, and I know that Charles also is really keen to develop himself into a sales manager. So I want him to spend, and I used this example in the presentation earlier, in 1 hour per week with sales strategy, provide 3 new initiatives to deliver on the outcomes of this strategy by December. So this is, I guess, a combination of lag and lead. And I probably, if I was being entirely pedantic, could split them out into 2, because spending 1 hour per week on the sales strategy, that's a lead indicator. It's a behavior I want him to display, whereas providing 3 new initiatives to deliver on by December is a lag indicator. It's the outcome that I want are those 3 new initiatives. Cool. Going down to skills and competencies. So I know that his people skills need improving. I'm going to say, be professional about it, call them interpersonal skills. Ensure that you are meeting customer expectations, spend time understanding client needs, responding promptly to inquiries to build trust and your reputation with clients. So we do have a library of skills and competencies. We are spending some time improving these at the moment. But if you are to type in a keyword into this section, you'll pull up some examples of skills and development pieces that you might want to add in there to show what you want your employees to focus on. The key point here is that whatever skill or competency you're choosing should support the achievement and delivery of these objectives above. I'm not massively concerned with Charles's driving ability. He's a fine driver. It's not necessarily relevant to achieving these outcomes up here, whereas improving on his interpersonal skills are, because I know it's an area that he struggles with. The other skill I'm going to add here is strategic thinking, because he's keen to develop himself into being a sales manager, and I'm keen to spend some time on my sales strategy. So looking at the bigger picture, weighing up costs and benefits of particular activities or initiatives, engaging broadly throughout the business to understand challenges and pain points. Cool. And at the moment, I'm pretty comfortable with where that's sitting. What I really want to get into, though, is the personal development plan, because this is where Charles's return is going to come from and what's going to excite him about the process as well. So what I want him to do is spend some time. You can never type when people are looking at you, right? With the head of sales, shadowing the management meetings, understanding expectations, and improving your understanding of the business. So this is a pretty typical activity when people are wanting to advance themselves in the business. It's not always easy to do it within their own narrower scope of your own smaller role. So spending some time with your one-up manager, or sometimes even your two-up manager, does a few things. One, it gives you a bit more visibility to management and decision makers in the business, which helps your career and helps you feel seen. Two, it helps you understand whether you like their job. Being a sales rep is quite different to being a manager, and so it's really important to make sure that your expectations and your anticipation of what the role might involve lines up with what the reality is. Because it would be quite disheartening for everyone to spend 2 years trying to get into this role and getting there and then hating it because you don't get to spend time with customers or whatever the reason might be. And three, it gives you a chance to really understand the expectations of this role so that when you are successful in stepping up, or when it is your time to take on something bigger, you're really clear about what you're expected to deliver on, and you're prepared to be working to that level of engagement with your business or with your stakeholders or whoever you're answerable to. Cool. And the other thing, that I want Charles to be doing is to attend a leadership basics course. And attending a leadership course is a good chance for people to stretch that muscle and start thinking about how they can be demonstrating leadership in their everyday work. It's not always for managers, and it's not exclusively for the figureheads of the business. Leadership is a quality and a set of behaviours that can be demonstrated across all levels of the business. So I want Charles to start thinking about how he can be practicing and strengthening those leadership muscles for when he is ready to step up into that next role. So head of sales is going to be responsible for this first activity, for making sure that happens. And Charles is going to be responsible for telling me which course he wants to attend, and then for lining that up and getting the ball rolling there. Okay, so coming back up to our objectives, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So as is appropriate for his role as a sales rep, I want him to grow sales in the Waikato by 10%, and that's a lag indicator. I want him to meet with customers according to a set meeting schedule. So 25% of customers have been met with by the end of December, and that's a lead objective. It's a behaviour I want him to demonstrate. And I also want him to spend some time per week with the sales strategy and providing some new initiatives to deliver on the outcomes of that strategy. So I could go into more detail and give some extra objectives here, but at the moment, this is really appropriate for Charles. He's a sales rep, so his day-to-day has to be delivering. I want him to spend some more time building his people skills, and it's really important that he's engaging with that sales strategy and that we're taking advantage of his on-the-ground knowledge to put together initiatives that myself as the head of sales in the scenario might have missed. I want his interpersonal skills to improve and his strategic thinking. One of those is about delivering in his current role, but then the strategic thinking piece is about that future-looking kind of vibe. And then the development plan is spending some time with our head of sales and attending a leadership basics course. Cool. I think I had a question here before. I just might jump back in. Question from Gary: do you recommend shorter periods between reviews as opposed to an annual review? Gary, that's a fantastic question, and it's a how long is a piece of string kind of answer. So where a shorter review period is appropriate is where in a shorter time period, your team member has had time to actually deliver on the objectives that you're setting for them. For example, we have a number of clients who have call centres, and their call centre employees have daily, weekly and monthly targets. So it makes sense to be meeting with them perhaps monthly, because by that point you have roughly 21 working days worth of data to talk to them about in terms of improving their performance and focusing on any areas which need a bit of support. Where a longer review period would be more appropriate is in a role perhaps like my own, for example, where I'm managing a team of people and business deliverables over a longer period of time, or if we're sticking with the sales sort of context where you have a longer sales lead into projects. So retail sales, you're probably looking at that 3 to 6 month piece. But if you're working in, I'm trying to think of an example, the power systems industry, where projects can take 1 or 2 years before you've got the document signed and you know that you're away, a year-long sales review would be entirely appropriate. So The short answer is it depends a little bit on the content of the work that you're doing. If your employee would need time to show that they can deliver on those outcomes, then a longer process makes sense. If they're in an environment where they have quite short turnaround time for whatever it is that they're doing, this includes trades roles, typically those jobs take less periods of time, then a shorter review period might be more appropriate. The last scenario where a shorter review period might be appropriate is where you have had someone who is struggling, and or maybe you are moving them away from struggling but still kind of ramping them up to being a fantastic and high-performing member of your team. A shorter review period might be good to ensure that they feel visible and they feel heard and seen, and so that you as their manager can correct any speed wobbles with them along the way from being a low performer or maybe coming out of performance management into being that more highly performing team member. Hope that answered your question. Please keep them firing through. I'm very happy to pick them up. Oh, again, question. So the review periods are not necessarily related to pay reviews? No, not at all. They don't need to be. So a lot of businesses do link their review periods to pay reviews. MyHR's philosophy generally is to align the review to the work and to align the pay to the performance. So where it makes sense to do pay reviews on an annual basis, and many businesses do, that's totally fine. Just because you might be reviewing pay on a yearly basis doesn't mean that it makes sense to have your performance reviews be as long as a year in between. Part of the intention behind separating performance reviews and pay reviews is to have the focus for performance reviews be on the performance and not be seen as a chance to negotiate a higher wage every single time you're meeting to have a chat about performance. Because if someone isn't performing, their attitude shouldn't be, although sometimes it is, pay me more and I'll perform better, right? That doesn't make sense. If you're engaged to do a particular type of work and you're not delivering on that, then performance reviews are useful to make it clear what the business's expectations are, but it may not be tied at all to a pay increase. So the answer is no, not necessarily. Cool. All right, I will check back in with the chat again in a few minutes, but we'll carry on moving along. So I've got my objectives set up for Charles, I've got my skills and competencies and my personal development plan. So the next step is to just check all the details and make sure I'm happy with them. So it's for Charles, yep, that's fine. From July to December, that's great. Check-in reminders are monthly, that's great. Review, cool. 3 objectives, 2 skills, 2 development, that's fine. Cool. So now that I'm happy with the content of the review and remembering that I can go up here and save it to drafts at any time, that's totally fine. Down the bottom here, the software is asking me to choose Charles, his name will go blue, and then to activate the performance review and notify him. So if at this point I'm fully comfortable that that the objectives and competencies are what I want them to be, I might already have given Charles a call to say, hey buddy, I'm setting up your objectives for the next 6 months, expect an email over the next couple of days. My next option is save, and the review has been created for Charming Charles. So he has also received an email. And so the email he receives on the left, this is for Peter, not for Charles, but the names will change, as it says, hi Charles, your performance goals have been set. Please sign in to review your goals. He gets prompted to log into MyHR, and on the right-hand side, his objectives will look like this. So here are his performance objectives, here are the skills and competencies, and if we scroll down, then there'd be the personal development plan there as well. So this is the employee's first touch point with the software, and now the review is active and just running along in the background. Great. So that was a sales rep objective, or a sales rep performance review, sorry, at the lower end of the spectrum. If we go back to our scenarios, we're now looking at Productive Penny as our new operations manager. So remember, she's inherited a team, she's new to the business, and the GM wants her to focus for the next 6 months on getting to know her team and keeping an eye on business metrics, but not focusing on delivering any massive change right now. So we come back to performance reviews. If I scroll down in the active one, I should be able to see Charming Charles in there. Oh, maybe it hasn't refreshed. His name will come up here when his review's there. And oh, this is my chance to do a new review. I'm entering in a Productive Penny. Oh, and going through the next step. So again, this looks very similar. We're setting goals for a future time period. It's going to be from now until December, because that's my 6-month time frame. Or I suppose it would be January, actually. Let's move that to January. Cool, and we'll catch up in the middle of January to look at these. My check-in with Penny, again, is going to be monthly because she's a new manager. I want to make sure she's supported in the business. It's not so much about assessing her sales targets on an ongoing basis as it is making sure that me as her new manager, as the GM, that I'm building my own relationship with her while encouraging her to build a relationship with her team. And I'll have the same reminder again. Cool. So next steps, let's see if I can find a template to talk to. No, I'll do this one from scratch as well. Cool. So remembering that my focus here with Penny is on building a relationship with her team, I would like her to meet with each member of your team individually by the end of August. This is a lead indicator. It's the behaviour I want her to demonstrate. And then I want her to establish performance reviews for each member of your team by end of well. So that's also a lead. And then the lag indicator I'm going to have here is I know that the team has historically underperformed, and because they've been an underperforming team, their churn rate or the ratio of resignations to the size of the team has been quite high. So I want her to reduce churn or turnover, you might call it in your business, from 30% that it is now to 20% by end of January 2019. Cool. So that's a lag indicator. That's the outcome and I want her to be delivering. From there, we have a set of standard operating procedures in our business, but they're really out of date. They're from about 2012. We've introduced a couple of new softwares in the business. We've introduced a couple of new ways of doing things. So what I want Penny to spend some time on is updating our SOP documentation, have 60% of this revised and correct by end of January. That's a lag indicator. So you'll notice I'm not telling her how to make sure that SOP documentation is updated. She's a really experienced ops manager. She's coming in with a bunch of years under her belt already. So I am just concerned about letting her know what my expectations are, not necessarily about how I want her to achieve that, that objective in this particular field. The last thing I wanted to do is spend time with health and safety department. Actually, no, I'm going to change that. I'm going to say no reportable incidents or injuries. And that's a lag indicator again. So I'm not telling her how I want her to manage the incidents and injuries and health and safety in the business. I'm just telling her that my expectation is that we don't have anything reportable happen over the next 6 months. Cool. So in terms of the skills and competencies that she might need here, the strategic thinking, I think, again comes into play, but from a slightly different angle. So when I'm talking about strategic thinking, I'm thinking more about people management. So conscious of the cost of poor people management, setting up infrastructure to help the team succeed, engaging with the business and other managers to understand pain points and low-hanging fruit. Cool. The other point I want to have around here is building on her leadership skills. So I know she's experienced, but I'm not quite clear what her experience with a low-performing team has been before. So this skill and competency is going to be developing deep understanding, appreciation of the challenges your team faces, delivering on commitments made to them to build trust, and those commitments will come about through that performance review process she's setting with her people, and building credibility within the business more broadly. Cool, and that's probably good for now. In terms of the personal development plan, so we have an in-house leadership program that I want Penny to go on. In-house leadership program. Complete all modules by Jan 2019. And Penny's responsible for this one. And for Penny at the moment, that might be enough. She's already quite experienced. The challenge for her is now going to be delivering on those changes to the team that she's responsible for looking after. It's not so much about her own career development, but making sure that she's supported to deliver in the business as I'm needing her to at the moment. So attending the in-house leadership program for Penny does two things. One, it means that she's feeling like she's getting a bit of development, but two, it will get her onto the same page in terms of language and in terms of leadership and behavioural models that we use within the business, so that she's speaking the same language all the time and picking up the lingo and the cultural nuances that we don't always get in those first few weeks of starting with a new business. I think I had a chat here. I'll just come back. And Nick is asking, is there a seminar for running the process, as we see this is more about establishing it? And Nick, great question. We're up to 11:46 now. The last 10 or 15 minutes of this webinar is about going through that process for running the performance review. If you would like more help on that, we're happy to run another webinar. That's totally fine. That feedback, if you don't find the content that we're about to cover enough, if you could put that in your feedback survey, that would be really helpful in us gauging appetite for running something about running the process rather than establishing it. So Jalpa's asking, I see you haven't assigned any percentage for the objectives. Is this not recommended? Or is this the case where we link performance reviews to pay only? Jalpa, that could be two questions. Question one is asking why we haven't assigned a percentage weighting to each objective. So for example, meet with your team individually is 20% of the performance review and so on. Or you could be asking, why haven't we assigned any percentages in terms of the deliverables for the performance review objectives? I think it might be the first question, because here I've got reduce churn and turnover from 30 to 20%, and then update the SOP documentation and have 60% of that updated. If your question is about assigning a weighting to performance review objectives, the module isn't set up to allow you to do that, and it's a bit of an old-fashioned practice. No offence to anyone who does that at the moment. The intention and purpose of performance reviews, going back to those earlier slides, is to help people be accountable and for there to be a clear line of sight between your expectations and what you're wanting them to deliver. But more importantly, it's about facilitating those human discussions about performance and facilitating those human discussions about career development and about where you want them to be spending their time. I don't know if any of you have experience with weighted performance review pieces, but where I've worked in businesses before that have run them, it becomes less about the human conversation relating to performance and development and much more about niggly discussions about why for this 20% weighted objective, why you only gave me a 50% rating, which means I only get 10 of the 20%, and me thinking that I should get 14%, and then if that's time to pay, it means overall I'm down a couple of points, and it becomes an exercise in detail management rather than an exercise in human conversations intended to make it a lot more, intended to make your relationship more functional and more productive, I guess. So that's a longer answer. I'm happy to pick up with you separately if you want to have a discussion about that, but the module doesn't support it. We don't think it's a constructive way to manage these kinds of performance conversations, and the focus should be on the human piece and the human discussions instead. Thank you for your questions, everyone. That's great. So quickly finishing up here with Productive Penny, I've got my 5 objectives here relating to getting some relationships going with your team. I want one of these outcomes to be that the churn and the resignation rate drops. Then there's also some content around health and safety and around our standard operating procedures. The skills and competencies I want her to focus on are strategic thinking and her leadership. And for her personal development plan, we're keeping this a bit light. I just want her to attend the in-house leadership program and have that completed by Jan. Next step, I get reminded to review all of this. Yep, that's cool. Choosing Penny, and I'm going to activate Notify and hit save. So Penny has just received an email. Hi Penny, your performance goals have been set. Please log in, and she then gets a chance to see them. So Penny has now been, or her performance review is live, it's activated. If you've chosen to receive reminders, you'll get an email like the one on the right here, letting you know it's time for your check-in, your performance check-in with this employee. This could be just a phone call to go, hey, how's it going? I know that in January we said, or in July, sorry, we said we wanted to reduce churn by 30% to 20%. Are we on target for that? Was that cool? Do you feel supported? It can be a really quick conversation. Once you've had that check-in, if you want to, you do have the option to add a check-in note below. So you would just go to that person's review and click add a check-in note. This gets dated. It's a free entry text field, and it just gives you a chance to quickly capture the notes from the discussion that you had with that employee. So now we are on to the piece in time where the employee's performance review is ready to be assessed. When it is time for this appraisal, you'll receive an email asking you to log in, and it looks like the one below. Hi Sylvie, it's time to complete the final performance appraisal of Charming Charles. Please sign in. And this is what it comes up with in the website. So the rating scale is 1 to 5, and that's quite intentional. A 3 is a good outcome. 3 means their performance is exactly where it needs to be. They're not below par, they're not above par, they're doing exactly what you want them to do. So a performance review with all 3s is perfectly fine. Performance objectives, you get a chance to assess 1 to 5. Again, 3 is a good rating. Skills and competencies the same. So this can be a slightly more subjective assessment, and it relates more to your assessment of how they have developed their skills and competencies and whether they've displayed the skill to the level that you wanted them to. So we're working through it, complete the ratings. Here on the right, this example has got a couple of 3s and a 4 for performance objectives. This employee too did a pretty good job demonstrating their financial acumen, negotiation, and then their office computing. So being able to use computers appropriately. And then with sales, they did a good job. They were at a 4. They're exceeding my expectations, and they should be pleased with their performance. Down the bottom, personal development plan. Yes, they did act on feedback from their manager when it was appropriate, but the sales training didn't happen, and that means that we selected a no. That's something we can roll over into the next performance review. So just quickly, we talked about 3s being acceptable. A 2 means they're below your expectations and will need to develop in this area. A 2 isn't necessarily cause for alarm. It just means that they weren't meeting your expectations. And hopefully, if you've been having regular check-ins with them, wink, wink, they'll know that they needed to put in a bit more effort to get there, and it shouldn't be a surprise to them when they do get a 2. We advise that no employee should ever be receiving a 1. The purpose of those regular check-ins, again, is just to make sure that the employee is on target for the first point, to make sure that they are achieving those objectives, but also that they feel supported enough to achieve those objectives. So you shouldn't ever be giving a 1. If you have, there's probably some reflection to do on how you manage the process and whether you could have done anything differently next time to support and help your employees achieve. Okay. So down the bottom of the assessment piece are these free text fields that I mentioned earlier. So you can add additional comments about things that went well or didn't go well during this period. So here we can say, look, that was a great sales experience. Love that you were taking ownership and following through on leads. There was some really good initiative with marketing materials for the AMP show. And when I was tracking the cold call conversion rate, this employee did excellently. So none of these were in the original objectives, but the employee did do well on them. And so I want to acknowledge the efforts here. 3 things that didn't go well. For this employee, they were late to work on a number of occasions. They also didn't achieve or didn't attend the sales training, which is due to their failure to enroll in on time. That was really disappointing. And there were a number of complaints from colleagues that this employee wasn't responding to their emails or calls in a timely manner. So again, these 3 things that didn't go well don't relate to the original objectives that I set, but they are things that we want to raise and that we want to be managed differently, or for this person to be behaving differently in regards to in the future. If you've been keeping notes on the employee, and this is honestly one of my favorite functions of the website, so I geek out over it quite a lot. If you've been using the MyHR notes function to keep notes, when you come to this stage of the performance review, if you want to add in, the positive notes you've been keeping, you can do, which instantly gives you access to a record of feedback that has happened over a period of time. And it's not or you don't need to then rely on your memory or your handwritten notes on the day to be giving this good feedback. Because I know that when something good happens in January, by the time July rolls around, I'm likely not to remember it. It won't be front of mind. So using the notes function is a great way to integrate consistent and more frequent record keeping, with making sure that the feedback you're giving to the employee as a part of their performance review is relevant and targeted because it's feedback that you've taken over a period of time and not just off the top of your head on that day. Cool, so you've completed your assessment. This is where you click submit and the employee will be asked to complete their own self-assessment. Again, just to stress, they won't be able to see your ratings or comments. This is just the trigger for the website to ask them to log in and complete their own assessment. Jumping back into chat. Are employee notes visible to the employee? No, they're not. They're entirely invisible. So where you're keeping positive notes or negative notes on your employee in MyHR using the notes function, that's blind to the employee. Only managers who have that access will be able to see those notes. Thanks, Gary. Cool. So moving right along, once you have completed the assessment process, the employee then receives an email asking them to complete a self-appraisal. It looks exactly the same. It's nothing new. So the email, hi, please log in. The scale and the details that they see look exactly the same. And what isn't shown on this PowerPoint slide is that if they kept scrolling down, they too would have the same option to put in 3 things that went well, 3 things that didn't go well, and anything else that they wanted to add in there. The only difference is that they can't add from the notes function, so they would need to manually type their feedback about the good things or the bad things. Cool. So you've completed your appraisal. The employee has completed their own self-appraisal. You will then get an email saying it's time to complete the final performance appraisal. And when you log in, you'll be able to see your marks down the right-hand side. In this case, mine are red as the manager, and the employee's assessment, which are in green. I don't know if you guys can see the detail on the screen necessarily, but there are some discrepancies and some synergies. So here for objective 1, I rated them a 3 and they rated themselves a 2. So I gave them a better rating than they gave themselves. But for example, in 3, for all inbound calls answered within 3 minutes, I gave them a 4 and they gave themselves a 2. So they massively underrated themselves from where I thought that they were performing, and so on. The next step, once you've seen this field here where you can see their ratings and see your own, is to book a meeting with them, preferably face-to-face, to go through this and agree on a score for all the different objectives. So where, for example, for objective 2, we both rated him a 3. That's pretty easy. We'll call it a 3. For objective 3, where I rated him a 4 and he rated himself a 2, we've agreed to disagree and split the difference by grading him a 3 for that piece there. So it shouldn't take more than kind of 20 to 30% of your time going through this ratings piece. It's meant to be a quick assessment piece to make sure that you're both on the same page. And then 70 to 80% of your time should be spent talking about their performance generally and then about what else is going on. And that's the end of the slideshow. Thanks, everyone.